My wife's disrespect drove me to the edge, but now she's fighting to save our marriage. I never thought it would come to this. I've known Karen since we were in our 20s. She used to be my rock, supportive, loving, and kind. We'd get through anything together. But something changed, and I'm not even sure when it started. Maybe it was the new friends she made. Or maybe it was just time wearing us down. But over the last 2 years, the woman I married has become someone else entirely. I'd come home from work hoping for a peaceful evening with my wife, but instead, it was just problem after problem. Vince, you didn't take out the trash, or why can't you pick up after yourself? She'd been home all day, and there'd be dishes piled up, laundry untouched, and her favorite reality show on the screen. I'd ask her if she could handle some of the housework, but she'd scoff, saying, "That's your job too, Vince." But I'd just put in a 10-hour shift at work, while she stayed home. The worst part? She started listening to her single friend's advice on how a modern marriage should work. Suddenly, I was the chauvinist husband, and every conversation we had turned into a lecture on how I needed to respect her independence. I respected her. I loved her. But it felt like she was more interested in proving a point to her friends than actually being there for me. I finally reached my breaking point after one particular evening. I'd just finished working late, exhausted, hoping I could come home to some peace. Instead, she was out with her friends again, without even letting me know. I left her a message asking where she was, but she didn't respond until 2 hours later. When she walked through the door at midnight, I tried talking to her calmly, telling her how much her actions were hurting me. She rolled her eyes and brushed me off. That was it. I told her if this kept up, I'd file for divorce. She laughed in my face, told me I was bluffing, and went to bed. I stayed up numb, staring at the walls. Maybe she thought I'd never have the guts to go through with it. But something in me snapped that night. The days following that argument were tense, silent. I thought maybe she'd wake up and realize I was serious. But nothing changed. She went back to her routine as if my ultimatum had been a joke. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. Karen continued to live her life like nothing had happened, staying out late, ignoring housework, and barely acknowledging me. Every time I brought up her behavior, she would accuse me of being controlling or old-fashioned, claiming that she didn't need to prove anything to me. So one afternoon, while she was out, I decided to take action. I went to a lawyer, filled out the paperwork, and initiated the divorce process. My hands were shaking the whole time, but I felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally reclaimed control over my life. When Karen saw the divorce papers, her reaction was something I'll never forget. She stared at them, speechless, and then looked up at me with a mixture of shock and fear. "You're not serious, are you?" she asked, her voice cracking. But I was done playing games. I told her she'd left me no choice. She broke down, sobbing, telling me she'd made mistakes and regretted taking advice from people who didn't have her best interests at heart. She admitted her friends had been pushing her to stand up for herself in ways that even she knew were damaging to our relationship. But I told her it was too late. The damage had been done, and I was ready to move on. I stayed with a friend for a few nights, needing space to clear my head. But Karen kept calling and messaging, pleading for another chance. She swore she'd do anything to fix things, even cutting off her friends if it meant we could rebuild. Part of me wanted to ignore her and move on. But the memories of the woman I fell in love with held me back. After a few days, I agreed to meet her in person to talk. She looked different, less confident, almost haunted. Karen told me she'd ended her friendships with the people who'd been influencing her. She admitted she'd lost sight of what mattered, and her regret seemed genuine. "I know I've treated you horribly, Vince. I can't believe I let it get this far," she said, wiping her tears. "I miss us." Her words hit me hard. This was the woman I'd fallen in love with. She asked if there was any way to fix things, even if it meant going to therapy or counseling. For the first time in years, she looked vulnerable, willing to do whatever it took to make things right. She even said she'd look for a job, something she'd always been opposed to. I'd begged her to work before, just part-time, but she'd refused, claiming it wasn't necessary. I told her I needed time. I still felt angry and betrayed, but I could see her remorse was real. I didn't promise her anything, but I agreed to put the divorce on hold while she started making changes. I wanted to see if she was willing to put in the effort to take responsibility. Over the next few months, Karen made good on her promises. She found a part-time job at a local bookstore, started going to therapy on her own, and took on household responsibilities without complaint. She also scheduled couples counseling for us, something I didn't think she'd ever agree to. During our sessions, she opened up about her insecurities, admitting that she'd felt stagnant and unfulfilled. Her friends had made her believe that standing up for herself meant rejecting everything about our relationship. She confessed that she'd been afraid to face these feelings and had taken the easy way out by following their misguided advice. I was still hurt, but I began to understand where she was coming from. I told her how isolated I'd felt, and she listened. Really listened, for the first time in years. Each session brought us a little closer to understanding each other, and while the wounds weren't healed, I could feel some of the anger melting away. One evening, as I came home from work, I found Karen waiting with a home-cooked meal, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. She looked at me with the same softness I remembered from years ago, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. "Am I still angry?" "Yes. It'll take time to let go of everything we've been through, but I'm willing to give us a chance to rebuild. I've agreed to officially pause the divorce proceedings, and we're both committed to putting in the work. This isn't the happy ending I'd envisioned, but it feels like a real second chance, one built on honesty and mutual effort. We've still got a long way to go, but at least we're both trying." After years of marital issues, I served my wife Karen with divorce papers. She broke down, regretted her actions, and promised to change. She cut off her toxic friends, found a part-time job, and started taking responsibility at home. We're in counseling now, and while it's not perfect, we're both committed to making things work.